Dear heads on the wall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Hey! Dear heads on the wall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Dear hunter shot Bambi, Bambi took the fall, dear heads on the wall, always watching you. Yeah. You're not paranoid if they're out to get you. You're not paranoid if they're out to get you.
Morning. Today is the 21st of February. Weird conditions out here today. On the one hand, it's like 37, so it's not that cold. I think last week I mentioned late February snow where you have a crust layer to the top. That's definitely in effect. So although I did bring snowshoes with the hope there might be conditions for it, that kind of defeats their purpose again. Punching through this stuff is kind of tiring. So it's going to be a day of, you're not going to easily get in 2 miles in here without burning a lot of calories, but we'll go in, we'll look for tracks. The prevailing conditions are going to be probably hindering of that, and we'll see what else we find and share some things and go from there. That's our plan, so come on along, you know the drill and all the rest of that, but we're going to go in and see what we can find and have a workout getting through here. A little bit further along, and if you can see that yellow spot over there, despite not having tracks immediately available, that's signs of a bobcat spraying and coming through, and maybe being heavy enough that, or light enough, he's not punching through like I am. I had to abandon my gaiters because they just weren't working. So I have a little strap thing on the bottom of my hunter's pants that do the same thing. They act like a stirrup at the bottom of the foot to keep your pants over your boots so you're not taking on wet heavy snow into your socks and getting wet feet. Which on a day like today, ironically, again, it's just under 35, it's like 35 to 40 degrees. It's actually not that cold. So I'm finding myself in a state of adaptation because I think I overdressed too much. Whew. And walking through this wet, heavy, crunchy stuff, which for visual purposes is this deep. So not quite knee deep, but just shy of it. It's kind of a workout walking through here. So we're going to move towards the pond because that's usually a water source, which means any larger fauna in the area would have come by there at some angle to show themselves. And you can kind of get an idea of what fun it is to kind of punch through this stuff. But again, snowshoes would be a bigger surface, and once they punch through, you got to lift that with all the snow on top of them, which is no less of a workout, if not, it's more. So, and the thickness of the snow is actually proving to be a bit of a hindrance. So we're going to do kind of a stop and go video today just to focus on that, because walking through here is kind of a chore. So those are tracks, but those are old tracks. They're deer tracks from last week, but melt and refreeze being what that is, it kind of distorts it over the week. You can't really tell what it is now. But we're going to make our way towards a pond. I thought I would point out, there's a subtle spot of it too, the bobcat's been out and prowling around, spraying and marking territory. Whew. But we're going to cover some ground, get over that way, and we will be back. The snow is definitely deeper. Not only am I sweating a lot from the workout of this, you can literally feel the work that my quads and my calves are doing today. So you're getting a workout out here. There's that much. I will say, ironically though, every bit of warm weather clothes that I'm wearing is working against me though, because it's actually kind of warm out. Even though I'm walking through knee-deep, crusty snow cone quality snow. So, rather than touch on, I'll touch briefly on some gossip. It's old news. The Hoaxers 2.0 group has a flare-up of the Jason Miller, Randy Harrington thing again. Apparently, Jason Miller, who again, I will freely admit, I don't know from a hole in the wall, so I'm not going to really take sides on this, has been accused of stealing somebody's photos and posting them of his own. I don't know enough of the background of the situation that I'm going to fall on the bandwagon or not. But he apparently tried to make a run at redemption by turning on Randy Harrington, who is, I'll diplomatically say, no stranger to controversy in certain corners of the community. But the person who made the accusation against Jason Miller is not having it, and basically saying that he's sticking to his guns and you still look like poo. And I guess Jason left the group in a snit after trying to repair relations with the admin. So that is what it is. Let's do something different today, though. Let's cover a topic that is kind of, sorry about that. I'm kind of struggling to not be uncomfortable, because I'm literally, you see snow, but I'm sweating like a pig right now, because walking through this stuff is really, really sucky. Conditions today they're pretty, but they're not subpar, because you're also getting dripped on by all the melting snow up in the trees. So every now and then you get that targeted little dollop on the back of your neck that goes down your shirt and makes you nice and chilled for that one or 2 seconds. It is that time of winter where you have cold, wet, crunchy snow, but it's starting to get warmer too, which is why the snow is it's either slushy or it's wet and heavy crap. And we're going to have a snowstorm apparently tomorrow night into Monday. It's going to amount to like 6 feet. So what I will do with that, just to kind of, because it's on my mind, I'm going to hit that in 2 efforts, because that way you're only doing 3 inches at a time of wet, heavy crap as opposed to 6. And it'll be a workout, but 6 inches is not 2 feet, because the last time we did this and they called for it, it was like closer to 18 inches, and even though it was powdery, it was still enough that you ate your Wheaties, you were good, but otherwise you're kind of sucking wind a little bit. Anyway, today let's talk about good books to read on the subject if you're kind of new to the community and want to cover a couple of things. I'm going to cover 4 that I have read and find value in. My feelings towards the actual authors, in some cases, not necessarily withstanding. Most of them I hold in very high regard, but they come from different angles, each one of them. So I'm going to start with Giants and Cannibals by Kathy Strain, which is a book that is very in tune with the Native American take on the Sasquatch phenomenon. And that is a unique approach that she brings to the table over time, is that she, from last I knew anyway, had a lot of contacts within First Nations and people of that background, so she has an inside track to their take on things that they might otherwise not share with a non-tribe member. And it's a unique take on the subject from that standpoint. And although I kind of view that as a outstretch of folklore, I don't treat it in the same category as the woo, largely because it's part of their spiritual belief and they grew up believing this. And these people have been on the same land that America now occupies for a whole lot longer a period of time than we have. And it's probably not naive to think they probably know a thing or two about the land we haven't even begun to figure out yet. So respect the traditions. They do have a unique perspective on it, and I do have a strong respect for that, for the record. Giants and Cannibals by Kathy Strain. It's a good read. It's one that should be in your library if it isn't already. Secondly, we're going to move to Sasquatch, the North American Great Ape, which is by the late Dr. Bindernagel. And this one is a scientific look at it he's like the only other guy I know that's like a hard science guy from the aspect like the late Jeff Meldrum was. Both of them, may they rest in peace. And if Jeff Meldrum has a book out there that I'm not thinking of personally right now, you should probably have that one too, because he was a straight up primatologist. I think, if I remember right, John Bindernagel was a biologist of some kind, but he had a very down-to-earth, approachable demeanor about him. And before he passed, I did actually interact with him online. And true to any Canadian, he's a very friendly, very nice, very neighborly, gracious guy. Knows he's famous, doesn't care from the seeming bit of it, and very, very, very willing to talk to anyone. A very nice guy. But his book is very informative and has a down-to-earth yet scientific approach to the mystery, and is definitely one you should have in your library as well. And moving to one who some people may or may not have good feelings about, Will Jevning, regarding, I guess he had a falling out years ago with the Sasquatch Chronicles. I don't have a lot of like direct knowledge of what happened there. Will, to my knowledge, doesn't talk about it in great detail. I don't know if Wes Germer does or not, but regardless of that, Mr. Jevning has never been nasty to me, so I really have nothing bad to say about him. His book is Bigfoot Fieldwork 101, and this is a very good literal like field guide. The gear you need, the things that you need for gear. He goes into that in good detail. Then how to read, like map reading, how to know the tracks and sign of the everyday animals. Kind of like what I'm doing out here now, because I just passed like some squirrel trails. There's a lot of bobcat spraying about Bambi tracks, things, knowing what the tracks in your area are that are not what you're looking for in terms of Sasquatch. Knowing the actual, I actually went to the extreme of getting a forestry degree to get better at this kind of thing, which is something you can do. I did that online. It's a low. What did I pay for that? A couple $100 for the course, but I now have a degree in that. So, but he brings, regardless of how you feel about him in terms of Bigfootery politics, this is a very solid field guide, field approach, nuts and bolts guide on how to do that kind of thing. It also touches on pattern searches and things like that. Kind of. It sounds like he kind of takes that from a SAR, a search and rescue kind of performance, but these are still methodologies that play into covering a grid search of a given area, looking for sign too. It's applicable. Very good book to have, a very practical book to have in your library. And the final one I just got and I'm reading now, but it's a very thorough overview, touch on things, and that's Bigfoot, A Scientific Inquiry, and that's by my buddy Steve Culls. And I'm looking through it, and I'm going to have a more detailed review of it once I've read it all. It is, however, 400 and some odd pages, so I just started leafing through it last night. It does look like it's a very comprehensive book on these subjects. He covers the old stories, the compelling newer stories, and gets into all the arguments of dermal ridges and the flexible, why the foot does what it does for a Sasquatch, all the theories, looks at it from all the angles, takes a very balanced approach on it, which is why he and I are largely on the same page more than we're not, because he sees things that way. He covers the regional names for the Sasquatch. I told him last night, and I'll tell him again here on the thing, you missed a few. You got all the obvious ones. You got all the obvious ones that are regional around the country: the Skookum, the Grassman, the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Skunk Ape. Then he gets into the Yowie, the Yara, and the Almasty, and I forget the name of it, but the one in the Amazon. The Amazon actually has their own version too. There's like pretty much a version of this thing pretty much anywhere but Antarctica and maybe Hawaii. The what the hell? The one in Alaska. What you missed though, in Maine they have the Pamula. In New Hampshire into northern Vermont you have wood devils. In the corresponding part of Canadian soil directly over the border from there you have the Gaugau. I think Vermont or New Hampshire also had Old Slippery Skin, which is a name from the Native Americans from around the Revolutionary War times. So there are names for this thing on the East Coast too. You know, a lot of people have a name for this thing. And that's what makes this so interesting. But he covers a lot of stuff. So it's a book that's going to take me a while. I'm going to probably read the... I have to give him credit for being a decent, very, very, very thorough author in that not only does he cover a lot of subjects, but he like does the very, very scientific authorly thing where he cites his references and gives due credit where it's due, which is a very ethical thing to do. I respect that. So I'm looking forward to reading that in greater detail. I'll probably end up reading it 2 or 3 times just to make sure I didn't miss anything, because I'm not going to review it before I've gone through there cover to cover at least once or twice. And on that note, I think I'll leave you to ponder that, because I'm going to go look in the greater area around here, ponder how far into this I'm going to get, because this is an exertive walk today. And we're going to go over and make a loop through here and do a pattern sweep in this area. Probably not going to find a lot of new tracks, but mainly because lighter stuff, unless it came through in the last couple of days and is right on the surface, probably didn't sink in very much. Because when it was colder, if it rained and froze over, it was probably for a while like just ice hard, so you're not going to get, like rodents and things like that are not going to leave tracks on things that are like that unless it's like wet and just slushy. But squirrels did. I don't see a lot of screw tracks today. They're light enough, they're probably not going to do that, or they're tunneling with great exertion through this heavy shit underneath. Anyway, we're going to take a slight break and we'll be back in a bit. Update the nature of my whining. Now my knees are getting a workout because there's a couple of spots here where the icy factor is thick, so you can initially stand up to your ankles before you fall through again, which makes walking no more fun out here. It cooled down or something because the sweat has gotten over itself and all that. I also started stopping to take pictures and rambling about books I've read I think other people should read to get a good grounding in the subject, and I'm sure there are others. Those are not my only recommendations, but those are 4 that I have in my library that have made a very good impression on me, because they cover a lot of ground in terms of getting a very balanced and good solid foundation of the subject if you're going to pursue this as a person getting out in the field or just somebody who follows the subject out of personal fascination. Either's fine, but everyone's got their groove in this. But those are, like I said, I have different takes there. I also have a book, one of the 411 series that is local to the greater Northeast. It's interesting. I think other people give it more cred than I do overall. I think those are more into the realm of open to interpretation on top of it's more of a missing person story where you're kind of left with the mystery of what happened to people. There are definitely people that go missing in the national parks, though, because you don't just see that in the 411 series. You also see there are hiking There are hiking channels that cover this on YouTube where you have the missing person, like people that just walked into the woods. Some of them are cases where the person was known to be depressed and probably went out there, unfortunately, to unalive themselves. And I mean, one example, I forget the guy's name, but he was somebody who literally said, "Don't come looking for me." I think he had gone through some stuff. Weird things happen, and things happen out there. A story from a couple years ago, I remember. This isn't necessarily missing persons out in the woods related, but a person went missing largely because he, if I remember right, he hit his head or something, and he had a prolonged period of like 2 years with amnesia. He literally didn't remember who the bleep he was. You also have something called dissociative disorder, where people will, it's a mental illness where people will literally lose their identity and forget who the hell they are too. Similar effect, and then they wake up. I mean, there was a case of a British woman who had that, and she went missing for 2 weeks and finally got pulled over by a cop over there, and basically not knowing what else to do with her, he kind of committed her to a psych ward. And then like 4 days in there, she's working on an art project, and suddenly it comes back to her that she remembers who the hell she is, and walked over to their front desk and said, "Hey, I can remember who I am now," so they let her out. But weird shit like that happens too. In the case of the guy who had amnesia, though, when he came to, it turned out he was a wanted felon too. I forget what for, but he had like robbed a bank or something. But you run into weird shit like that. There was the woman in where the hell was it? Somewhere in the Northwest. She was missing for 2 weeks, and they found her, and her story didn't quite add up. She was found in an area that wasn't really that far off the beaten path, and the cops were kind of suggesting she had basically she was kind of like a hippie type, and she had kind of maybe partaken of exotic mushrooms or such. She denies it, but I don't know what they can charge her with. I don't know if that's a felony out that way, but they weren't necessarily buying her story. So you run into weird shit like that too. People can die of exposure. A lot of them unfortunately do. You got some Bambi tracks over there. So things like that do happen. I mean, when I got lost, it does affect your mindset. I can say this from personal experience, not to go over that story again, but you have that one period of time where you look out and everything in any given direction of the 4 directions you're looking in looks identical, and you have a sense of panic because you genuinely don't know where to go. And that does do something to the human psyche, where you have to, like, I had a conscious, I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for everyone, but I had to consciously beat back and beat down a sense of panic, because I'm like, suddenly I'm like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to get out of here. And that is I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on camera before, but I know for a fact I'm a claustrophobe, which ironically is the fear of being trapped. And what I'm describing is not the same thing, but it's similar enough. That could have possibly contributed to it in my case, but it was definitely because Survivor Man, I forget, his name's not coming in. Les Stroud, dummy, did an episode where they're doing an essay, and he was talking about this, and he's definitely right about that. And what happened to me was relatively tame, because I was in relatively known territory, basically as a crow flies 15 miles in that direction over there, and I knew the woods, but I got turned around. And it was more a matter of hypothermia and a race to get my bearings before that became more of a problem, but still legitimate. But so his book is interesting, this being Dave Paulides, but I don't buy into everything being paranormal. A lot of those things are explainable by much more mundane things. People every year go out into the park, and I discussed this by way of the New Hampshire law. It's probably a law in other places too, and I don't disagree with it, where they make you at the very least pay for your rescue if they have to come get you because you did something stupid. And a lot of people do go out into the woods every year thoroughly unprepared for what they're going into. There was I mentioned the unfortunate young lady that died in the White Mountains last year or 2 years ago. I have to remember it's 2026. So she passed in January of 2024, which is unfortunate. She was actually very, very well prepared too. So it can happen to the best of you, but there was a bunch of people that had to get rescued in early last year near one of the major ski resorts in the middle of Vermont, and these were just idiots who went out in jeans and flip-flops as the snow was coming down and they got cold, and just were people. They were probably teenagers, just had no idea what kind of stuff they needed to be up there, because by November it's cold up there. It's not like in the 40s and 50s. It gets down into the 20s and the teens at night. It's chilly, so you got to bring cold weather gear earlier up there. You have to remember, up there you have basically winter, mud season, black fly season, fall, back to winter. Vermont is not like southern New England. You have a lot more snow. It's a lot colder. And this year we were at I'm in with my better half. Actually, the last week in October, you were already having like a sleet storm up there. So it starts early up there. I've been hit with light, wet snow up there in June, believe it or not, up in the hills. So mountains bring different rules. And it's not a bad thing to harp on it, because it might save your life one day. It really might. What else? Well, keeping with the idea of just like things that are out here in books that are good. Another one that's good, that's very specific to the Northeast. Written, I think it was by Paul Bartholomew, who's a very, very nice guy, but also a wealth of information pertaining to the northeastern part of the U.S. But his book is The Monsters of the North Woods, and he covers like New England, New York, my stomping grounds, and covers a lot of the stories I don't have. I have some, and I do have a book in mind that I'm going to take from the caseload that I have, which is a lot of New York, a lot of Vermont, a lot of New Hampshire, some Maine and Massachusetts and other places around, and some odd reports from around the world. I got one from the Yukon for some reason, but the guy contacted us, and I'll hear your story, and we'll put it to the archives. So that's in the works. I have that going, and hold on, let me get by this guy, because or he breaks and gets out of my way on his own. That works too. A little bit. It's a little shallow around here, so it's less of a pain in the ass to have. Because the snow is wet, my boots are water resistant, and again, water resistant and waterproof, not the same thing. So my socks are going to probably get pretty wet. But the deciding factor that will get me out of here eventually will be wet feet, unfortunately. But that's part of being out here. Anyway, that's one writing. That's one project I'm going to have. I would encourage Steve Coles to write a book with his encounter, or like his witness reports archives too, because he's probably got some decent. He was telling me some decent stories last night about one guy who saw the Bigfoot example that is from the Hindu Kush in Afghanistan when he was deployed there. Like, they literally have that. They have one out there too that's very underdocumented, probably because we're not on the best terms with the Taliban, but locals there, I would bet, have stories, but you'd be very hard pressed to hear them. I'd be curious, actually, if like the old time like Maori people or Hawaiians from like pre-America Hawaii did have some version of that in it, because they do have like jungles and woods out that way in Hawaii. I do wonder if they have like a local legend or something like that there, because I know the Philippines have some kind of a monkey man type in their folklore. They have all kinds of weird shit like the Aswang, which I'm not going to profess to know what it is, because every time I hear somebody from there describe it, they have a different take on it. It's some kind of a witch, vampire, ghoul thing, but I've never seen it consistently portrayed the same way, which basically means you probably have different parts of the country having different takes on the theory. Kind of like the same way you have the upright bug-eyed looking thing as the chupacabra, as opposed to the mangy dog looking thing. They both are like the goat sucker, but there's different appearances that it takes depending on who you talk to, and the Aswang is one of those things. It's kind of similar to that, but they do have an ape man type thing somewhere in their folklore, which is, I'll have to ask Bill Ruscher about that. He is currently living there with his wife, so he might have better input into their folklore. They have a lot of interesting stuff, so folklore-wise, in that part of the world too. Which brings up like all of Indonesia. That's like a whole lot of jungle in Brunei. They probably have stories too that are a lot lesser known, and those are interesting because you have the orang pendek from that part of the world as one. Don't know enough about that one individually to have a feeling, to know how I feel about that one. But it's so far and so remote. I mean, and like the Congo and places like this are so far into the middle of nowhere that you probably have stories like that coming out of there too. Because when they found like the bonobo and the billy apes and the new populations out there, the ones like the alleged lion killers and all that. When they say they discovered them, what you have to understand, they mean that like white men discovered them. The locals had always known they were there and they're a part of the landscape. That's kind of the same way that the Native Americans probably felt about Bigfoot. I mean, they're the older tribe of people that were here before we are, and they've just always been here. It's just best to leave them alone. Which, you know, there's a whole history of the states that, well, the territory that was not yet the states. It's probably underreported. I know of, just as one example, as I jump around from subject to subject randomly now, I have a very thick book that covers the history of the French-Indian War, which is like from the late 1600s on. You have a proxy war between Great Britain and France by way of basically a war between New England and Quebec and its greater territories. And it's a very, very complicated period that, at least from my experience, they didn't cover in school history class worth a damn. Because you think like the Indians were living, the Native Americans were living like separate from the colonists, and that doesn't seem like it was the case. The way the book describes it, you had like the next village over was Native American, and that's where they come into town to sell you corn on every Thursday. And a lot of the Indian tribes already had padres living in wigwam number 4, and they had converted a lot of these people to whatever version of Christianity you're talking about. North of the border, they were largely Catholic, and on the New England side, they were Protestant, probably of the Puritan realm. If you're talking 1600s, I don't know if that modified into something else over time, but the thing of the matter is there was a weird proxy war and borderline slave trade too going on then. What happened was when the New England troops would take prisoners of war, it was predominantly French soldiers, but because they had a smaller population in Quebec, they would grab prisoners of war, basically being men, women, children, and depending on who took, if they were caught, if you were a New Englander, largely from New Hampshire, and you're an English colonist living like on the outskirts, and you're caught by either like what was it, the Huron or the Mohawk, you were literally enslaved into the tribe, and then if you survived the winter, that you would become part of the tribe's extended family. Because what they were literally doing, these are villages of like 100, 150 people. So if they would go out on a raid with the French and lose like 20 people in a raid, that's 20% of their village's population. So they're literally taking people into the tribe to replace the lost ranks, and they didn't care if you were English or Indian or what. But for that first winter, though, you were basically their slave. And this is like white English people. Or they would sell you to the French, and you became basically an indentured servant for 5 or 6 or 7 years. But they were bringing you to the monasteries or the abbeys so that they could get that Protestant thought out of your mind and bring you back to the one true Catholic Church as they saw it. And it was like they were doing it, but it was like something for hearts and minds. And there's this whole hearts and minds thing going back and forth where even after they were like, you know, their contract was up, they weren't allowed to go back home. So this was like a whole thing going on that you don't cover in school. Which is going to lead into a separate tirade that draws me away from the Bigfoot subject. But the thing is, there's a whole lot of history, and there's a whole lot of things like that that are out there. I'm going to stop that rant right there because I'm not really sure where I was going with that. I'm going to look for more tracks. You got old ones here. I'm looking for anything new. But as you have like the dripping that you can hear coming down with all the melt coming down from the trees, as it gets colder tonight, it's probably going to all turn into like a big sheet of like ice about yay thick. That makes it even more of a pain in the ass to walk through this, because you punch through that and then it just makes walking through here like you're punching through 3 layers of different texture. Again, it's a workout, but again, that's just me whining. Anyway, we're going to take a segment break and we're going to move up, well, in this direction because I haven't gone that way yet, and see what's walked through there, and we'll keep going. Anything else for books? Just to mention it, I am actually an author. I have authored 8 in a series of 11 sci-fi books that are basically the premise of a sort of kind of version of a younger version of myself being taken by aliens by mistake and getting sucked into their culture out in space and having to adapt to an ever emerging storyline. But you kind of have to read them in order for the whole thing it's too detailed to go into here. But I mean, if you want to check it out, I'm out on Amazon as Mike Humphrey with the Taken by Mistake series. There's 8 so far, and I have to get off my lazy ass and finish up get to market the last 3 versions, the last 3 installments of it, and then there may or may not be a 12th to wrap up the series. But check them out if you're interested. I'll mention that as well, and then I'm going to shut up and take a segment break like I said I was. We'll be back in a bit. Okay, I am kind of making my way northwest towards the final part of my loop. I found the moose tracks again. I took pictures of them, so I'm going to start working my way this way. I'm going to probably wrap this one up here because it's quietish, but you hear birds, so it's not like weird quietish. It's just kind of a quiet day rather. And like, subscribe, leave suggestions. Again, if you are of a mind, I have written a series of sci-fi books out on Amazon. If you want to check those out, they're available in either Kindle, like ebook, or softer hardcover. If you want to check those out, 8 so far, and I have 3 more to get published to round out a series. It's going to either be 11 or 12 installments. Each one averages about somewhere between 275 or 300 pages. Some are a little bit longer, and they tell a progressive story over time. Check it out if you're interested. Just plugging that. I don't mention it, but I probably should more. Anyway, check that out. I also have a Pixels account where I sell art prints of this kind of scenery and the like. So if you're of a mind, you can check that out too. If you go to my my Facebook profile, or my YouTube, I have links to those things there. Anyway, again, like, subscribe if you're of a mind. Leave comments, death threats, or commentary, suggestions of things you'd like to see me do out here, and we'll take those into account as I punch my way through this, what seems to be getting deeper in this area. But anyway, that's going to be it for today. Thanks for coming along with me, and we will catch you next time. Until then, bye. Right here, looking at this, likely moose tracks, but something that's noteworthy. I don't know if you can tell the difference in the tone over there. You also can see 2 spots of bobcat spray. So, and Bambi tracks right there. So there is stuff out here. I just, with the nature of the snow, noticed that I am now walking on a trail that's been beaten down a little bit more, probably by snowmobile, that is harder. So I'm up to my ankles now. Not as I shift my weight, and then I'm back down to my knees. But the nature of the hardness of the surface is kind of an impediment for actual tracks. So thought I would add that on the way out, since those are probably the most interesting tracks that I've seen since being here. But until then, right back where we were. Gonna wrap this one up here, and again, we'll catch you next time. So bye.